So, what is postmodernity?
So I suppose postmodernity to me seems like a kind of shift in focus towards more people-focused architecture, and I suppose it's more of a focus on kind of experiential qualities of spaces and buildings. And I suppose we also kind of see it as an embracing of narratives and stories and multiplicity. And these are often kind of themes, I suppose, that we kind of explore within our own work. And I suppose one of the projects that I feel that in some ways kind of encapsulates this idea of kind of postmodernity in a really good way is a project by Gaetano Pesce, who designed a chair called La Mamma chair. And I think this is a really interesting piece of design that really kind of in some ways kind of really talks about postmodernity, because of I suppose the kind of layering of kind of stories and narratives within this kind of I suppose this very functional chair. So it has very practical qualities to it. It's a comfortable chair, but it also can be seen as a kind of metaphor for different things. And I suppose it's something that different people will view and interpret in different ways. So it could be seen as the body of a woman, for example, and it could be interpreted, it has this kind of foot stand that could be interpreted as the kind of umbilical cord and a baby, but it could also be seen as a kind of ball and chain that is kind of attached to this woman. But on top of all of this, it also has this other kind of quality, this more kind of performative quality in some ways. So when you purchase the chair, it comes in this kind of flat pack, almost like pancake-like bag that when you purchase it from the shop, you can carry it home. And then when you unzip the bag, the chair starts to inflate and starts to, becomes this, really quite large chair in a space. And I suppose I see this as a kind of, a project that really embodies all of, I suppose, the kind of ideas around postmodernity and this multiplicity of kind of layers and kind of narratives within one space or one kind of object, I suppose.
So yeah, I think those material aspects, those narrative aspects are very much kind of a part of kind of postmodernism for us. And I think that the other aspects are then really about kind of society and about those kind of wider discussions. And I think that particularly kind of what postmodernism or postmodernity might mean now is also about kind of internationalism as well. And I think there are a couple of things in terms of almost like timelines that I think are quite important. And we'll sort of touch on this a little bit later as well. But I think for us, it's important to kind of think about kind of, in some way where postmodernism was and then where it's been kind of reused and where it might be now as well. For us kind of, I think that is kind of a key, part of that to kind of talk about. And I think that maybe that hasn't been kind of touched on previously, but that sort of in some way postmodernism was kind of sort of used and is now maybe being reused, and I think that there are various kind of conversations going alongside that, that sort of expand postmodernism, I suppose. And I think from my perspective, there were then other projects like, I think, postmodernisms. So we've got things like ultramodernism, we've got multiform, we've got these other kind of approaches to a kind of a sort of postmodernity that are also really, really interesting. and kind of pick up on some of those themes and kind of expand them further. So I think that, I think that postmodernity kind of has these specific aspects from a historic perspective, but then also there are these interesting routes that it can kind of continue on with in the future as well.
So on to the second question. Which figures from the first generation of postmodernists do you consider particularly relevant to your work?
So we've always seen the Italian radicals as a real influence in kind of the work that we produce, and that's really because of their thinking as opposed to kind of necessarily what they produced, and particularly the Italian radicals rather than necessarily the kind of architects who were called postmodernists sort of later, and I think really that's because their way of thinking kind of really chimes with how we approach things and how we think about things. I think they were particularly dealing with a kind of post-war situation, and then challenging a lot of the aspects of society that they were challenging kind of how people might live in their homes, how people might go to work, and trying to come up with kind of new ways of designing that would then address those situations. And so, yeah, they were really kind of searching for something and trying to challenge things. And then the ways that they started to answer those pieces were obviously through languages and through design kind of tools, which were kind of used and co-opted and changed. But I think especially for us and what we feel is valuable was through their material exploration and kind of how they dealt with kind of mass production and craft, and could start to see those as ways of starting to kind of to address some of those issues and to kind of redefine kind of how you would live somewhere, how you would work somewhere. And so those processes and those kind of approaches, I think, are really important, for us, and because it really is about the approach to the work rather than necessarily the sort of outcome. And yeah, we find them very, very important to what we do.
I think also to be a bit more kind of specific, I suppose. As Hugh was saying, we're particularly interested or kind of influenced, I suppose, by those who work on the kind of fringes of architecture and art, and we're just as interested in people working in other disciplines as we are in architecture. And yeah, so I suppose, as I mentioned earlier, someone like Gaetano Pisce is like a huge influence on our work, and his approach to kind of materiality and I suppose challenging, the way that he kind of challenges society and challenges different aspects of society. Other people are Nathalie de Pasquier and Peter Shire, both from, I suppose, the kind of Memphis collective, are kind of huge influences on the practice. And I suppose some of the architects, Ricardo Bofill, we organised a whole kind of field trip to visit his buildings in Barcelona, which was just incredible, going into these spaces where you're completely immersed in kind of colour, and just really, really wonderful kind of projects. And I suppose lastly, just to mention another duo of kind of architects that were really really kind of influenced by is Arakawa and Gins, and particularly their kind of seminal work, Manifesto, where they decided not to die. And I think this is really, we see as really kind of important for the practice and our approach, that our architecture is, I suppose, is not apologetic. It requires people to, in some way, kind of respond, and rather than being kind of passive in a space. We kind of, I suppose, try and design spaces that really are kind of I suppose, surprising in many ways, but also kind of require kind of response, I suppose, from people as they kind of experience the space.
And I think that experiential aspect is really important to us, you know, both in terms of our understanding of architecture and then also what we design. So yeah, directly going to these buildings and visiting them and seeing them and moving through them and understanding them through that is very important. And I think that while you know, for postmodernists, sort of other tactics like drawing were incredibly important. I think we find that the experience of the buildings is the most influential thing on us. And you know, yeah, I think another person to touch on is Richard England, and I think sort of the spaces and buildings that he constructed, you know, are incredible to go around and experience. And what they also do is that they're a very kind of they also have this really this kind of lived connection with history, and I think that some sort of some of that kind of approach to you know, dealing with history or dealing with context, but you know, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but kind of not just taking it as a given and sort of reappraising it sort of through work is really important, and I think something that's very interesting in you know, the work of some postmodern architects. So, third question. What role does architectural history play in shaping your work?
I think architectural history is, you know, really really important, and you know, it's something that we kind of, you know, we're constantly kind of referring back to the past and looking at, you know, how architects and artists and you know, fashion designers have responded to, you know, different kind of cultural shifts and shifts in society, I suppose. But I suppose we approach architectural history in much the same way as we approach, let's say, a kind of a site or a kind of the context in which we design our kind of buildings or public spaces within. We kind of almost in some ways collect the best bits. So yeah, I suppose we're avid collectors, and we kind of collect things, I suppose, from the past, but also collect, you know, the best bits of a site and use those to kind of inform our architecture, I suppose.
So yeah, I think we're absolute kind of magpies, you know, and yeah, picking out these kind of these sort of bits that excite us and interest us. And I think that's also potentially because I think our education of around history, you know, it wasn't that there was this particular kind of, you know, taught canon of like, this is how you're going to design, and so we're not taking things from a kind of didactic route. We're having this much broader view of things which were kind of never really shown to us, but we found out ourselves, and that, you know, that sort of self discovery is kind of is sort of really important, because you know, what we're doing through our design is very honest. You know, we really like the things that we're, you know, dealing with and designing, and I think that kind of in some way places ourselves, you know, we're dealing with history maybe in a slightly different way to postmodernism, because it, you know, it's not ironic. It's not. There's no kind of you know, it's not glib. It's very direct. And that then comes through in the kind of, you know, materiality. You know, I think we're not kind of trying to replicate something. We're not carving stone to kind of look in a certain way, or approaching it in, you know, as a sort of fallacy. We're dealing with very everyday materials, and we're putting them together in a way that we find to be kind of to kind of elevate them, you know, and to kind of get some of that quality from them. So it's very much about a kind of an honesty and a directness that I think we engage with those kind of those sort of themes and those designs.
Okay, going on to the fourth question. how does your approach to history differ from that of the first generation of postmodernists?
So I'll go off on a bit of a tangent on this one. So I think that kind of one first thing is that I think in some way we're possibly the kind of third generation of postmodernists, for want of a better word. I think that fat are very important for kind of what we're doing today, and at the same time what we do is very different to the way that they work with history. And I think that fat deployed postmodernism as a design methodology, and so in some way I think in some way we need to sort of recognize that. I think kind of the second thing, as with all isms and ists, is that we don't label ourselves, and it's kind of up to other people to sort of label us or categorize or critique, and that is fine. It sort of obviously helps to kind of create broader narratives and and relationships and collaborations and things like that. But I think it's a point that's worth making. And then I think the third one is that really we're now dealing with postmodernity. We're not sort of tackling a modernist society. We're tackling a postmodern society, and so inevitably our tactics and kind of conversations will be after that and will be in relation to that. And so sort of seeing that and acknowledging that and moving on from that, I think is quite important, that it is about a different landscape culturally that we're also kind of addressing with the work that we produce.
I think also another thing to say is that I suppose we live in a different time. We actually we're approaching our 10 years of having the kind of practice, but we first set up the practice soon after the recession. So we have kind of lived through kind of, I suppose, a period of austerity, and I think our work has been very much informed by that experience. We live in a world where resources are finite. Climate change is obviously a huge issue, but also there's more of a focus on kind of health and well-being, and these things are at the kind of forefront of what we do, and our work is very much kind of led by those things. But at the same time, we don't want, I think we've never, we've always, I suppose, created still very generous architecture. We've still, wanted to really kind of think about how we can use, often simple materials or recycled materials in a very kind of, in a way that creates really kind of generous architecture to both those who live in or work in the building, but also to the kind of public spaces around it.
So question 5, what is the role of figuration in your work?
So I think this is a really difficult question. I suppose in the way that I've kind of interpreted it, maybe is, I suppose, the role of kind of composition in our work. And I suppose, composition is a huge part of, the work that we do, and the way that the kind of processes, I suppose, that we have in or use in kind of the spaces that we design. And I suppose we also often look at paintings as a kind of tool for composition and kind of use of, certain, I suppose, techniques to kind of frame elements or to discuss narrative, I suppose. And I suppose one of the things that we also kind of look at paintings for is the use of colour and how colour can be used as a way of, it can be very kind of spatial. It can be used in paintings as a way of, making something appear to be further away or closer, and we use that in spaces as well. We use colour as a way of making a space feel bigger or larger, or smaller or closer or further away, but also it has environmental qualities, so you can make a space feel warmer or colder. And I suppose this, I suppose we use colour as a kind of as a tool, as a compositional tool, to design spaces using those tools, I suppose.
And I think it's also these kind of tactics are a kind of necessity. I think, you know, as you touched on, you know, this sort of we've had to be quite creative with sort of how we approach projects and get a kind of a generous architecture, you know, out of the projects. I think, you know, having gone through this period of, you know, having gone through a period of austerity, that's kind of absolutely necessary through the work that we produce, and we're very keen that the buildings are communicative and that they have that sort of that narrative tied within them. You know, we work very closely with our clients sort of to produce, you know, the buildings that we do, and we want them to then embody that discussion and have that kind of that sort of human element within it. And I think that really this is where that idea of kind of figuration maybe comes in, that you sort of start to see things that aren't necessarily there, and your eye starts to kind of fill things in and jump to conclusions. And we think that there's that real opportunity with the kind of public aspect of a building, and the fact that it can start to kind of maybe talk about that narrative, and you might start to understand some of that, the way that it kind of came together. Because I think that we feel that it's really important that buildings are communicative and have that kind of that possibility to sort of tell you a little bit more about them and draw you in, because then you're kind of taken on this experiential journey with them. So I think that's how we sort of see maybe the weaving together of kind of people and buildings.
And the sixth and final question: what makes postmodernity relevant in current times?
I think it's the fact that, you know, that postmodernity is about change and difference, and that change and difference is kind of a really important way of starting to deal with, you know, or to tackle kind of contemporary issues. I think that, again, you know, we're in this kind of, we're in a postmodern landscape, and so inevitably the kind of answer has to be postmodern in a certain way. And I think that approach of having a communicative architecture has huge benefits, and is something that's really, really important culturally as well. I think we're very keen to have buildings that we feel are a representation of the process that they've been through, and the people that we've worked with to design them. And so that inevitably needs to have a building that in some way speaks about that process. And so we think that then that has benefits to the people who both were engaged with the design of it, and then also who experience it once it's been completed.
Yeah, and I suppose just to kind of continue that, I suppose it is this kind of multiplicity of kind of approaches, I suppose, that also in some ways drives innovation and creativity, and we can see that in, you know, so many different kind of practices that are, you know, have lots of different ways of kind of, I suppose, interpreting this time that we kind of live in. But I think that really drives innovation.